Hello, everybody. Sorry to be late starting, and hello, B Smith. Thank you for your comment. It's Mike is actually with us tonight, but only in audio. You can prove that, Mike, if you could make yourself
Hello.
known. Thank you. Karis and Shannon are here, and is it Simon the cat?
Yes.
Yes, he's there too. So as usual, I've been so busy that I haven't planned my usual detailed scripts that I plan to produce. So unless people have got a lot they want to talk about, this could be quite a short meeting. But I heard that the live stream, Mike's live stream, which I missed last week, was quite busy. After we had a quiet one last week, didn't we? And then it was busier this week or last Thursday.
Yeah, there's some good questions in there.
All right, and let me just see if I can get these comments up. Yes. So good evening to you too, Cheeseface. Nice to see your presence, even if not see your face, and if it really is made out of cheese. Karis has posted. Oh no, that's not. That's where's it gone? You put something on here just now, didn't you, Karis? The article, but I think I can just skim through to it. We were going to discuss an article about a wheelchair user being confined in a flat. I'll just take you to the, I think it should, not that one. Bear with me a sec. Yep. If I go to Chrome. History, inside, there it is. Right, so if I go to this one, oh yeah, I'm going to delete. I'm afraid that orange square there is what where Mike would have been. I'm just going to get rid of that. There we go. So I don't know if people can see this large enough, but shall I? I mean, it's not a. I mean, it's probably too long for me to read it all out. But would you? You've read the whole article, Shannon and Karis. Have you both read it, or is it just you, Karis, who's read it?
I've skimmed through it when Karis sent it, but Karis has read it in full.
Because I must confess, I haven't. So, would anybody like to summarize it or give a short presentation on the subject?
Oh,
I mean, I can give it a go if you want. I mean, basically, there's a guy who basically moved in when he was kind of, I guess, fit and healthy, so to speak. And he's developed these mobility issues over time, and it's now got to the point where, I mean, he's kind of saying that often he'll kind of return home from home, being out of the shops and whatever, and he can't get into his flat. So there's one instance where, I mean, it says he was picked up by paramedics because he had hypothermia. And other occasions we couldn't get back until 2:30 in the morning. And he's basically saying that although the policy of the housing association is to have a 24-hour call-out policy, that just means they need to turn up after 24 hours. And that doesn't actually mean they fix it. So often they'll turn up, so they haven't got the right parts, and then vanish again. And the housing association has kind of done its job. So I think, I mean, the question that came up last Thursday was really, I think, about someone who had mobility issues, and although the accommodation they'd been offered did have a lift, she was worried, or I think it was a she, but it might be a guy, were worried that if the lift kept breaking down, you're going to have a situation like this article describes here, where it's just, I think the title is kind of being in prison, or like being in prison. So there's a frustrating lack of kind of anything from inside housing there about, anything any sort of homelessness duties. Did anyone think this might be a situation where it's not reasonable to continue to occupy this accommodation? But I would have thought you could put a good argument simply based on the number of times that the lift has been broken down. Because by the judging by it, this says there was a 3 or 4 month period, I think, where effectively the lift was basically out of action all the time. So I think that was that was the kind of the bits I read. I didn't read the whole thing, but I think that was the kind of gist of it.
Yeah, that seems to be it. That there is, it's not a sort of basis for a challenge, but it raises the question of what could be done apart from taking presumably legal action to require them to carry out adequate work so that the lift isn't breaking down all the time. But it,
I mean,
it
I'd
would,
argue that.
yeah, sorry, Mike.
So I was just going to say, you could. I mean, if you're in a situation where you're locked out, you could argue that you're homeless because though you've got accommodation, it's not available for your occupation, and so you might be able to get the council to essentially put you up in a B&B, and that in turn, if you did that enough, in turn, they would get annoyed with putting you up in B&B all the time, and might put some more pressure onto the housing association to actually properly fix it. But yeah, so as I say, I'm not quite sure where the line is, where the threshold is. How many times does your lift have to break down before it's not reasonable to continue to live there? Which I think,
Well,
I think the question is left open.
I think they mentioned in the article about it being unsuitable, but what stood out for me as well was the housing association's response, like to him not being able to leave his flat at all for 4 months. It was like, oh, we're sorry for the inconvenience. Like, it really sort of downplays the detrimental impact that has on not just like mental health but physical health as well, like not being able to get outside for fresh air. It's just a bit mad to me that they're not pooing their pants and thinking about discrimination and everything else, what, like with this issue, and they're just like, yeah, we're sorry for the inconvenience. Like, what? How are you being so blasé about this? Which I think highlights the fact that these issues happen all the time, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, I think I may have mentioned a couple of weeks ago that some years ago I was working based mainly in Wandsworth, and there was quite a lot of flats on the Winstanley estate, which had lifts that were breaking down, and people were saying they couldn't live there. But then Wandsworth were able to produce repair records showing that when the lifts didn't break down that much according to them. When they did, they were repaired within a very quick time, which that was like 25 years ago. And I think what you've found since then, over the sort of last 10 years or more of austerity, is that things that were bad before have got really, really bad. And so, I mean, then they probably couldn't produce. Well, I mean, in this case, they couldn't produce records to show that they repair the lifts. And I would say it doesn't take many incidents. I mean, for it to be unreasonable to continue to occupy. But I mean, presumably he doesn't necessarily want to lose his home because of this, and it's more a question of getting them to carry out works, which. And did it say that in there that he? I mean, presumably apart from the lift, he's happy with the place.
I think it mentioned that there was a lip to the door or something. Sorry, Mike.
No, sorry, that's what I was going to say. And also, I mean, also noticed that I think he got his counsellor involved, who said, they're well aware of it, but okay, again, it's kind of question of, well, what are you doing about it?
Yeah, we'll have to see. I'd have thought there's going to be some challenges along these grounds coming up in the near future if this sort of thing is happening. Because, or then again, it may be that we just won't hear about it because local authorities will accept that it's a pretty textbook case of unreasonable to continue to occupy, or not even being available, let alone unreasonable to continue to occupy. So see where we go from there. I think we got a message. Oh yes, hang on. Andrew, I just put Andrew up there. So
there was a weird thing as well where they were trying to put him into like, not weird, but like sheltered accommodation. But it highlights if you're a young person who is in a wheelchair or like has health issues, like it's not an easy out. So I understand why he doesn't want to move into that, and I understand that even though he's older, like he feels it's unsuitable for him. But I think for the housing association to be like, well, we've offered him sheltered, therefore, well, no, you need to be planning for anyone with a wheelchair, not just an older person with a wheelchair. And I just wonder, like, how many doctor's appointments or how many waiting lists he's like had to wait for because he's missed an appointment, and then whatever for hospitals and stuff. Like, it's quite a big impact on it.
Yes.
And what would happen? What compensation do they offer if he does miss appointments, or if he gets capped on his benefits because he hasn't attended appointments and health assessments there. So they're not thinking about repercussions for every aspect of their lives at all.
Yeah. Can you imagine? Like, I got a text today and was like, a reminder for an appointment, and was like, it costs the NHS £180 if you like don't turn up or whatever. Imagine if like every appointment a disabled person missed because of their housing issues was like charged to the local authority.
Yeah.
Like, the NHS would be a bit more better funded, but the local authority would potentially start taking homelessness and health, that connection, maybe a bit more seriously.
And also we're talking about that, but not what if they had a job and somewhere to be or children to take to school and things like that? They would get fined for their children being late or missing school.
Yeah, because disabled people can still have work and family and a life outside of their illness, right?
Yeah, so that's, well, we'll have to watch this space and see if we hear more about this. But I'm afraid that's about the only thing that's on the agenda this evening. I was going to have a quick chat, but I can't. I was having a bit of trouble finding it, but maybe I can just try and find it now.
Can I just mention something while it was on
Yeah,
the
no,
news today?
please go ahead. Go ahead.
So there was, I mean, basically 307 or 317 local councils have pushed back on the government's pledge to build enough housing. So they're interviewing someone from West Lancashire, like a councillor from West Lancashire Council, saying, you know, we're essentially what he's saying was we're not going to meet these targets, as in like we're almost like going to refuse to try. He was going to say there wasn't enough land and stuff, and you know, West Lancashire is probably one of the areas which is certainly down the lower end of the kind of pressure on housing. So yeah, interesting to see what really comes, because essentially, yeah, it might be that there's some sort of constructive dialogue from local councils that goes back to central government, and they will actually do something about it and properly fund it and properly resource councils to actually, you know, secure the land and whatever. But so there was that kind of notice. Then also just some memes I saw going around, because Notre Dame has just been repaired. I can't remember when the fire was, but it's now been fully repaired, and a number of people saying, you know, Notre Dame was fully repaired in the time that it's taken to not take the cladding off my building yet. So there's this kind of political will of like, you know, if you actually want to, you can kind of do an awful lot, but there's just not that political will. Same with that, this kind of lift being broken situation. Essentially, it's just, you know, no one cares, or not enough people really care. So, yeah, I guess it's just about kind of just raising it as loudly as possible, politically as possible, to try and get some sort of traction, because bottom line is they can fix the lifts, they can replace the lifts with better lifts if they need to. It's just whether they can be bothered to pay for it.
So I think I should be able to get this up on screen now, which is, it's going to be, if this works, yeah, is it a statement? Trying to get a statement of case to show you, which Caris and I have been working on today. Where has it gone? Sorry about this. Maybe that's it. Yes, there it is. Right. So I'll just take that over. Now you may think this is going to be some breach of data protection, but I'm pleased to say that this is a specimen which isn't a real person. And tell me if this is too boring to go on with, but I thought people might like to see what lawyers prepare at the beginning of a case. And if anybody's aspiring to be a lawyer or a caseworker doing housing type work, what I think we might try and do is do some more videos about this and just put them out there so that people can watch them and then use them as a sort of training for doing this sort of thing. But what the first step to taking on a case is sort of unraveling untangling the ball of string, as it were, and trying to establish precisely what the facts are. And that's not just to say what the actual issues in dispute are, but you've got to get all the details about the person with the housing problem and their family and their medical conditions and where they live, and there's a lot of information to get there. And the danger is if you don't write it all down somewhere in a sort of coherent place, then you might well forget what it was you untangled later on, because most legal aid lawyers have got quite a few cases on, so you've got to have somewhere where you can go back to, but also if somebody else works on it, then they've got something to look at. And I thought I might give, if I just go through this and give you an example of a snapshot of a case. Have I driven anybody to the point of quitting yet? Okay, so do interrupt if you've got any questions. But so this is for somebody called Jane Smith, who I think that this case is about unsuitable accommodation. Yeah, and which overlaps, like a lot of cases do these days, with disrepair. So it starts off by giving her full address and what the status of the property is, whether it's a flat, how many bedrooms it's got, and who she lives there with. And then it's got a list of the medical conditions. And unfortunately, it's very common nowadays for people, this list here to be quite long, that people have a number of medical conditions. I mean, it overlaps with if people have housing problems, not necessarily because of this sort of thing, but I mean, people don't live in bad accommodation because they've got medical conditions, but people with medical conditions are probably more at risk of being put in bad accommodation because they haven't got the money to go somewhere else. And also they may suffer from, if they had depression before, they may find that it gets worse as a result of their living conditions. So here is a list of the medical conditions, and then the details of the GP, the details of the work that she does, the rent, whether there's any rent arrears. It's quite a common problem for people not to realise that somebody's got rent arrears until they find out later. It's good to find out about those straight away. And then if there's a history of any legal action, that's a good place to put it in. And then here's a list of all the reasons why the property's unreasonable, why they think it's unsuitable. So I mean, there may somebody may say it's unsuitable because, say, for instance, the lift doesn't work, but it may be that there's half a dozen other things that's wrong as well, which you might miss if you don't ask. And then the question is whether you've got much evidence of the conditions there. Maybe you've got photographs, or in this case, the person she says she had a private occupational therapist come to the property who prepared a report on it. You might also want a surveyor to prepare a report rather than an occupational therapist. But that it's difficult to get those because they charge. I mean, a surveyor to do a full report on disrepair is going to cost you. You're not going to get a lot of change from £1,000. But the good news is the legal aid agency will pay for that, and they are pretty generous in that they'll pay routinely. If you give the landlord a month's notice and they don't do anything, you can then get a surveyor to go in to establish whether the problems are bad enough to take it further. And then, yeah, I think I was throwing in lots of different stuff here because in the background I didn't mention that the landlord is also taking possession proceedings, and so there's information about that. And then there's a social worker involved, and this is a tip for any lawyers watching, or anybody that does casework. What I try to do at the end of the statement, which is easy to forget, because if somebody comes to you in a crisis, you tend to just focus on putting out the fire rather than looking at the longer term issues. And so it's a question of asking somebody what's a good outcome to your case from your point of view, and you may find that isn't the same as you thought. For instance, in this lady's case, she's got a number of different problems. One is that her landlord's trying to evict her. Another is that she's got unsuitable accommodation. And so it could be that somebody who only looked at the possession side of it would say, I've got great news for you. I've managed to stop the landlords from evicting you. But because they didn't make a note of these things, or they didn't ask what do you want as a solution to this problem, the client may say, well, that's great, but I didn't want to stay there anyway. And so here it says, I'd like assistance in requiring the council to rehouse me and my children in suitable social housing, which is wheelchair accessible and can be adapted to meet my son's needs. And I'd like to be in the Hammersmith area. So that gives you a rough idea of what they would like. Sometimes it's a question of managing people's expectations. But as I think I've said before, if somebody has them or a member of their family has physical health problems, which lead to adaptations being necessary, you've got a much better chance of getting social housing than somebody who doesn't have that. So I think over the next, when I have some more time, I'm going to do some more on this, because the art of getting this information is, I mean, you've got to go through a sort of checklist of all the different questions you need to ask. So I think I'll try and put the checklist out there online so that people who might find themselves trying to get information from somebody and put it together can use that and can use this template. And hopefully that would help people, because even if you're not doing this as a caseworker or a housing lawyer yourself, it might be a lot of people have difficulty finding a solicitor, and and some people write quite long emails setting out what their problem is, and it'd probably be good for those people to have a look at this and see how you structure it. So I hope that is of some interest to people. And that's the end of that. I'll just see if there's any comments. I've put this screen over the comments bit.
So I've got a couple of questions.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you've just answered one, which I was like, it would probably be helpful, wouldn't it, if people are looking for like a legal aid lawyer to sort of almost do something like this, to present to the lawyer that you're asking for help from. But like, it's such a small question, and maybe I just have like a weird brain. But do you know the rent arrears thing that you said is often an issue? Now, obviously, when you're on housing benefits pay in arrears. So, like, you get to the end of the month and your rent account will show that you are in arrears, even though you're not in arrears. So, for an overthinker like myself, and for a lot of people who are on benefits and might find themselves homeless, would you say that counts as rent arrears or not? And I guess it doesn't wholly matter, because this is just for internal use, isn't it? This isn't what you would send to the local authority, for example. So
no,
things like
no.
whether it's a disability or whether it's, you know, official rent arrears and stuff is sort of less important, I guess. But yeah, I don't know if that's just a really pernickety thing that my brain's stuck on. So apologies if it is.
No, it's a good question, because it's sort of the implication, quite rightly, is that anybody who is receiving universal credit or housing benefit is at risk of being in rent, is going to be in rent arrears. But I think the answer is that it depends on how much. And I think most landlords, I mean, private landlords tend to, get quite angry about rent arrears on a personal level because they may have been having trouble paying their mortgage. But most social landlords, I think, factor into their sort of expectations the fact that there will be a sort of default rent arrears situation. So that it would be very rare for a landlord to take possession action where the rent arrears were less than a month's rent, or 2 months' rent. I mean, I do find the odd one. I mean, I had a housing association a few years ago that sort of took action over £300 rent arrears, which is pretty aggressive. But it's usually, I mean, I would say it's if £1,000, you're sort of starting to look at problems with, you can expect to receive a notice or something. But the other thing to bear in mind is that there is a pre-action protocol for disrepair proceedings, And so before social landlords take possession action due to rent arrears, they are supposed to make contact and say, is there anything we can do to help? The trouble is that they tend to treat the normal letters they do saying you're in rent arrears, pay up or we'll evict you, as being their invitations for somebody to, or offers of help, but they're often have the opposite effect. So if somebody's suffering from depression or doesn't feel self-confident, and often the housing officers are really unpleasant about it too, and they don't really want to get involved in becoming a benefits advisor to the person. But again, now with the don't forget the Homelessness Prevention Act as well, that if you do have rent arrears and your landlord is getting on to you, you can go to the local authority and say, look, can you help me? And it's not just a question of, they could make a discretionary housing payment to cover some of the rent arrears, but they could also, and they should, I mean, in many ways, the Homelessness Prevention Act means that local authority staff should be acting in the same way as we do, because they should be saying, how can we help you solve this problem? Whereas, unfortunately, because of the pressure of work and the history of a sort of more adversarial, less helpful approach, it's still, oh well, we'll check if you're in priority need, and if you're not, we're not going to bother doing anything. So I hope that's quite a long and winding answer to your question there. But did you say there was more than one thing, or did I answer the other one?
No, I think that was it. Yeah, the other was just where it's for internal use, not to send to the council, and that it's useful for people to do this if they're trying to get legal aid lawyers, like to lay it out like this. And I think Cheeseface has just commented, saying about the formal writing, and I know we've said that previously about like almost trying to get the emotions out of it, to sort of like just get down to the facts and this is what's happening on paper, rather than like, which is why actually I was surprised in your statement that it said, I think the housing officer was mean to me or something.
Yes.
I guess that's useful in terms of when you're then communicating, you know, a bit of the not like the social sort of dynamic, and if you were then going to make a complaint afterwards, I guess that would become relevant, wouldn't it? So
it's a tricky thing when you're writing the statements, because I mean, it is in the name of, it's all done in the first person, but it's clearly written by a lawyer. So it isn't really them speaking, but it's them sort of speaking through a lawyer. But and therefore it is difficult, because often people who are not looking at this in a sort of professional way, and it's their lived experience, they will take it personally. Whereas for me, if I hear that a housing officer has told somebody, oh, I don't think we're going to be able to help you because you're not in priority need, or I think you're intentionally homeless, I mean, that's it's not me that they're saying it to. If they was talking about putting me and my children out on the street or something, I'd be pretty upset about that. But it does, I mean, it takes some of the heat out of it, but also you do have to keep something in there so that it is actually their experience. So that, I think that's why we put that in as an example. I just put Andrew's comment on there. So Cheesefood saying, didn't know about it a month ago, cuts out the waffle, as you said last stream. People don't always have time to read evidence. Yeah, that's true. And I'll just come back to this comment here. I've got Andrews added, Friends Housing Association is fine with him paying arrears back at £50 a month. Big difference with his experience of private landlords in the past. I should say that for people on benefits, £50 a month is quite a hefty payment. And I mean, it's a while since I did it now, but I used to do the duty rota at County Court, and there was sort of rules of thumb as to what was a reasonable amount of money to be expected to pay towards rent arrears and also mortgage arrears, because there'd often be the question of, I can pay off the mortgage arrears, but they would get very big very quickly, and so you might have £10,000 rent arrears. But the rule of thumb with the rent arrears and mortgage was, if you could pay it within 7 years, that's about the sort of time. So you work out your amount, and then and particularly with a mortgage, it may be less obvious, but judges will often say, look, this mortgage was only ever supposed to be paid over 25 years. So if you can pay the arrears off, you're still you're always going to be owing the money. But with rent arrears, it used to be, I mean, it shows how long ago it was that I was doing it, but 10 years ago or so, it was about £2.75 a week. And that was based on what the DWP would take out of your benefits to pay towards the rent arrears. But obviously Universal Credit has jiggered that up a bit, hasn't it? Because they will sort of take a commercial amount of money. Do you know that off the top of your head, Shannon or Caris, or Mike, what the sort of levels that Universal Credit deduct for rent arrears? Because they're pretty hefty. And that's influenced the way the courts think as well. Because, but I mean, if it would cause hardship, I mean, if you're on, I would have thought £50 a month for somebody on benefits is quite a big chunk of their what's meant to be subsistence payment. Really, I mean, it's not there for paying off debt. So I would say,
I think now it's £4.55.
£4.55 a week. So that would call it a fiver then. So that would be half of that. Yeah, I think that. But anyway, I mean, as Andrew says, I mean, private landlords will expect even more. So yeah, that's the rent arrears.
Universal Credit has also got a system in place now where if you are paying back arrears, whether that's because of a loan or rent arrears or anything like that, they've got like a whole other system now that you can go on to Universal Credit and like adapt how much you're paying. And they'll ask you like loads of questions like, can you afford this? And then they'll check various things. And yeah, it's a whole new, I've not seen it in like my own Universal Credit, but I went to a thing where they were showing it off, and it genuinely seemed quite like customer orientated, of like, let us know what you can pay and you've got a bit more control over it. So like if one month you were really struggling, obviously I'm sure there'll be checks and balances with that, but yeah.
Because there was, when Universal Credit first came in, I mean, this is going back a few years, it seemed to be almost sort of spitefully or silly. There was that idea that they'd make you wait for a month. Was it a month before you got your first payment? Because that's what it's like if you're sort of working. So you should feel what it's like. But I think that might have mellowed out a bit. But the rent arrears thing was quite a big change. And so Cheeseface, you're saying that the attachment of earnings would that come directly from somebody's wages or from their benefits, or would it be paid by the tenant? Because I mean, it is good if you can get direct payments, but so I think that's just about everything for today. So it's 10 past. If anyone has got any other questions or things to raise, I should raise one bit of news that is that there's bit of good news for housing lawyers, legal aid housing lawyers. After I think it's had how many 27 years of no pay. We haven't had a pay increase in our rates of pay since I think the late 90s, and they are actually talking about increasing a 10% increase. I think that's the figure, isn't it? Which is nice to hear. I think it's just people doing housing and debt. So anybody doing other areas isn't going to get more. And I'd have thought I mean, grateful as I am for the pay increase, I think criminal lawyers have it much worse than we do. I mean, during coronavirus, housing lawyers had to sort of dabble in other areas of law which we don't normally do, such as antisocial behaviour injunctions. And if you tried to enforce an injunction through the courts, it has to be through the criminal courts, because it's you're applying to have somebody committed to prison for contempt of court for breaking a court order. And the rate, so we were going to court, and the rates of pay were so small, there's just no way you could do it. It would be like less than it would cost you. It would cost you to travel to court almost. I couldn't see how criminal lawyers survive doing that. Unfortunately,
So
that there seems to be less antisocial behaviour stuff happening now, because it was usually people with mental health problems who are on the receiving end, and I think there's been a big fuss about that. Sorry, Shannon, I cut you off.
no, I interrupted you. With the pay increase, then what impact will that have on people? Will it increase the amount of lawyers that do legal aid fund, or will it essentially slow them down because they're getting more money for it? Or like I'm interested. No, but I'm not trying to be like
no, it's a good question.
a numpty, but like how will it affect like the people who are actually going through this? Will it increase the availability of legal aid lawyers because they're getting almost an incentive and a pay rise to work on these cases, or will it actually hinder it because I don't know?
Well, I mean, the problem is I can remember what it was like in the old days before the pay. Before we were quite when we were getting paid more. And the problem is, and I don't want to get into trouble with other lawyers, but unfortunately, lawyers were abusing the system, and so they weren't. I don't think that this. I think your worry that it might just mean they work slower. It could well be true. The traditional problem with lawyers doing legal aid, which I think is still a problem, is that there's a tendency to use unqualified staff who are not properly trained and not properly supervised to carry out specialist functions, and then claim the pay for that as if it was a solicitor doing it. Which, when I first qualified, before I qualified, when I first started doing legal work, I used to go on a sort of freelance basis to police stations and sit in on interviews. And in those days, thank God it's changed now, but there were no requirements for the staff to be accredited. So I had no knowledge of criminal law. I'd done a law degree, so I knew basics. But I would go to the police station and there'd be somebody in there, and the police obviously were in on it. Well, the police could tell if the person representing the client was useless, but they weren't going to tell anyone. They'd sort of call me sir and stuff and be deferential, and it looked like. But I would say to people, I don't actually know any law. I can get you some cigarettes or something, or make some phone calls for you. But unfortunately, a lot of those people changed solicitors. But I thought it was scandalous that solicitors were doing that, and it was widespread. I'm being mean about criminal lawyers now, but I was maybe that's why they don't get anything now. But there's been this sort of war between the legal aid agency and the legal profession, where they cut our wages or our rates to pay dramatically, and then we make a fuss about how vulnerable people are not getting helped. But the problem was vulnerable people were suffering as a result. And the Law Society hasn't done enough, in my opinion, to clamp down on that, and that's meant that the legal aid agency have been very hostile. And if you remember, even under the Labour government, they really didn't like legal aid lawyers. I think they called it sort of people driving BMWs and making left-wing noises.
Do you think a 10% raise is enough of an incentive for people to work in this sector, though?
No. But
Because with all the legal aid deserts, is that enough? 10% increase when they cut it quite drastically. Do you think it's enough funding? Yeah.
Well, it also raises the question of how much should lawyers be getting paid to do legal aid work, and what is a reasonable amount. And I think the hourly rate, I should know this off the top of my head, but if you're getting paid £50 an hour for something, that's not dreadful. A lot of people think that's quite a good wage. I've got a message here. So, but it's something. I think if you work in an imaginative and efficient way, you can make a living doing this, but only just. And it will help that they've increased the money. But there will be people that will just absorb this, and it won't. I don't think it'll make a big difference to the landscape. There won't be people springing up to do the work.
Yeah, I guess that 10% pay rise doesn't change the infrastructure infrastructure of the fact that there's no like specific like legal aid housing lawyer centres in each town, for example, or you know the running costs of a firm doing it and all that sort of like people not being set up. So I wonder what it would take to encourage that to happen if it's not a 10% pay increase, which I'm sat here like 10% pay increase, bloody hell, I'll have that. Like, do you know what I mean? That's quite tasty. But I'm aware I'm obviously not a lawyer, so I don't do that sort of specialised work, I guess. But yeah, I don't know what it would take.
No, it's something that, I mean, there should be a sort of national discussion of. But the other problem is, of course, that the government, even if legal aid lawyers were, you know, behaving as well as they'd have you believe they do, the government still has a problem of, if you've got to choose between what you spend money on, whether it's children's hospitals or people, you know, doing what we do, we sort of come second. And there's also the public. I mean, the public's quite hostile still. I mean, partly because of the media, but I mean, say criminal law. I mean, people don't really like the idea of people who do terrible things getting free legal representation, even though it's only that they've been accused of doing terrible things. And similarly, there's people that think, oh, the people that are getting housing advice are just sort of lazy and scroungers. I mean, you don't hear that quite so much now as you used to, but it's still a sort of element of hostility there.
Which is weird because, and again, I'm not saying this is the case, and I'd be interested, obviously, you guys are actual lawyers and know like the demographic, but I don't know how to word this now. I like, for me, it would never have occurred to me to go get legal aid and utilize that part of the system. So I'm almost like, you almost have to be a certain level of educated or aware or like to use that system, which is then, but that's not necessarily, I think, what the general public think of the people that are using legal aid. They think of the people who are on those gross documentaries of like, you know what I mean, on benefits and scrounge and all that horrible stuff. Whereas actually, I'd be surprised if those were the types of people that were actually getting legal aid. And I could be completely wrong. And sorry, Mike, I've seen you on mute. I know you haven't. But yeah, I don't know if that's your like actual experience or not.
I don't know about you, Karis, but my experience has been that very few people are sort of taking the mickey, as it were. Most people have genuine problems, and we're all, you know, the people that are sort of critical are only a sort of very bad bit of very bad luck away from being in the same position. So, for instance, if you have a child who has a disability, you know, that means that you have to stop work and look after them, and your standard of living drops dramatically, and you suddenly find you're dependent on a welfare state that is broken down, and is very inaccessible. And yeah, I mean, I'm tending to think that the funding for what we do in the future might be better coming from the NHS or seen as a health service, not just because of the fact that people are suffering health damage to their health, mental and physical, as a result of these social problems, but because it's often due to genuine medical problems that people are suffering. And it's not like there's, you know, the usual rubbish you hear about there's some bloke who's really healthy and he's begging at the station every day and then he drives home in a Rolls Royce. I've never come across that, really. I mean, there's a few people I think, well, you know, you're a bit unreasonable. You expect everybody to do things for you, but that's maybe when I'm tired or something. But it's not. Most people have genuine problems, and having said that, most legal aid lawyers that I deal with, I mean, are pretty good at what they do. I mean, there's quite a few that still aren't and are doing the things I was talking about. But there's a lot of people struggling to sort of make a living doing it. But speaking of which, and maybe this would be a good opportunity just to say at the end, because I've got a message that Cheeseface was put a message up saying somebody had been trying to contact me, but not sure if I've been getting them as a different email address. But one of the problems that Karis and I have had, or we've all had on this show, is that there's a sort of elephant in the living room that people have been ringing, people have been putting messages in, more on the other show where you get more messages, but about problems and saying, well, how do I get a solicitor? And then I'm sitting here, I am a solicitor, and I could be saying, well, hello, you know, here I am, you can call me if you like. But the problem is I'm so busy that if I did that, I would probably not be able to provide a quality service, and I'd probably end up getting taken away in a van or something at the end of it. But I think Karis and I have been working together over the last few weeks now, and we're trying to build up a system at Virgo Solicitors where we'll have capacity to take people on. I'll say more about this later on, but I think we're getting to the point. I mean, it may be that we'll have to say sorry. We'll have to put the shutters down again. Oh dear, I'm sorry about this. Person X is. I'm already working on their case and they're having trouble getting hold of me. So sorry, Person X. I think if I think it's who I think it is, I did actually send that person a message this afternoon with a link so they could make an appointment to talk to me. So hopefully that's solved. So you might want to just check with them. But yeah, I mean, this is the problem. I mean, we take on a lot of cases and people will find that it's difficult to get in touch with us. But I'll put more on about that. So I think that's about everything. Is there anything else anyone wants to say or ask? I think we've got all the comments. So thanks for your comments, mainly Andrew and Cheeseface. And thank you, Mike and Shannon and Karis for joining in. And I'll try and get something more structured together one of these days. But I'll see you all again hopefully on Thursday for the other channel and back here on Monday. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Will.
Okay. Cheer, everybody. Bye.